I am Kwesi Kana. I am the coordinator of the grant that we received at Bretton Woods from the Calvin Institute of Christian Worship. So this is one of the events that is underwritten by the generosity of that grant. It's called the Faith at Work series. We began by looking at and listening to some personalities from the community who were actively involved in work, and they talked about how they put their faith to work. We began with Mayor Stephen Campbell, followed by TV 8 sports announcer Jack Doles. And then we heard feedback from you all that said, that's good, but what about us as retirees? How about hearing some speakers that can talk about how we as retirees can put our faith to work? So we responded, and Magic Bob and Susie came and shared their story of how they got involved with their respective ministries. We recently heard from Renard Kalasa, a retired lawyer, and he gave an excellent talk at the Ridge a few weeks ago. Today, we're going to hear from our speaker in just a moment, but I want to give you some save the date dates for you to remember. On June 30th at the Terrace, Molly Guillaume is going to be speaking, again at the 10:15 time. And then last night I told you that Phil, we were wheeling and dealing, so I did something for him, he's going to do something for me. He'll be speaking on July 22nd at the Terrace as well. So again, we thank you all for coming. And now I'd like to introduce our speaker for this morning. This morning you're going to hear from Ken Campbell. Ken worked for IBM from 1961 to 1994 in customer service, contract and business development, logistics, IBM Consulting Group. From 1995 to 2019, he served as pastor in churches in Connecticut, Massachusetts, and Texas, and was honorably retired emeritus in the Presbyterian Church in America, PCA. Since retirement, Ken and Kathy have ministered in India, and Ken, via Zoom, ministered in a teaching ministry in India, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and other Middle Eastern countries, Sri Lanka, Maldives, the UK, and France. His teaching includes church history and theology. Now, you may recall from the tagline from the promotional blurb about Ken that said, twice retired, busier than ever, and loving every minute of it. Teaching, preaching, consulting, Zooming around the world. After this word of prayer, I invite you to welcome our guests. Let's pray. Lord, we thank you for this morning. We pray that the words that we hear from Ken will uplift us and encourage our faith as we hear his faith story and his journey. Bless him now as he comes to share his story with us. In Jesus' name, amen. Won't you welcome Ken Campbell.
Help that lady with the bottle of ketchup, please. Well, listening to that intro, I think I can probably sit down now. It's a delight to be here and to share with you how the Lord has guided Kathy and me through what Kwesi has shared about us. So let me just begin by talking about the beginning and how my life's circumstances in growing up and in work at IBM and then in the ministry have put me to where we are now. So faith at work and faith in retirement comes together, and it'll come together as I share how we got here. First of all, I was born at a very early age, back in 1943, the second of two children. My brother is 6 years older than me. He is still living in Massachusetts. We were born there. My dad, I'm a first generation, Norman, my brother, is as well. We're first generation Americans. How many other first generation Americans are here? Okay, parents were born in the Netherlands. You're not a first generation American, Philip. You were born in the Netherlands. Right. Oh, so you're not a first generation second generation. You're a last generation Netherlander. Your children are first-generation Americans. You are not. Jake, you're not a first-generation American. No, you're not even a second. You're a last-generation Netherlander. So the children of immigrants are first-generation Americans. So if you're an immigrant, you're a last generation from wherever you came from. So my mom and dad are last generation from Great Britain, particularly Ireland, Northern Ireland, for those who are paying attention to what goes on over in Great Britain. Mom was always quite insistent on saying she was British. Because if you say you're Irish, oh, you're from, well, actually, no. And then you get into this long discussion, and then what kind of an Irishman are you? Are you the kind that stands up and goes to jail and goes on a hunger strike, or do you just drink green beer on Paddy's Day? So what kind of, well, actually British. So that ended up allowing her to identify herself fairly quickly without getting into a lot of discussion. So I'm a first-generation American. Dad emigrated in 1927. Mom emigrated in 1930. And she once said that she was on one of the last ships that came over. Immigration got changed within the 30s, and then it opened up a lot more for immigration from a lot of other countries after that. At any rate, they were married in 1933. They got acquainted here in the States. They discovered that they had lived probably about no more than 10 miles from each other in Northern Ireland. But this was not in the day when people drove around in their cars. So a horse ride or a cart ride to the local market town might have brought their families together, but they didn't know each other until they met in the States. They got married, had Norman in 1937, me 6 years later. Dad was a farmer in Ireland, and the story is that in 1933, after they got married, they went back to Ireland for their honeymoon. And it was at that point that Mother, having also grown up on a farm, she says, "Nah, I'll not be the wife of a farmer." So Dad ended up selling his farm, came back to America, and he then served as a private chauffeur for a wealthy family in Salem and in Marblehead. You're going to ask, as you asked Kwesi at the end of the session last evening, now tell us about what you're wearing, your shawl. Well, I'm going to tell you about my shirt, because you're probably wondering about it. Probably if you look at the back, you'll see what you'll see when I turn around again. It's on the front. This is Massachusetts Bay. If you know Boston, Gloucester is up here. Boston is here. Plymouth is down here someplace. And then Cape Cod comes around here. And Martha's Vineyard, which will come into my story later, is down there, one of the islands off of Cape Cod. This is Salem Sound. Derby Wharf is here in the 1800s. Salem was one of the greatest seaports in America. Whaling was a big thing. There was also a lot of transport between Salem and Africa and India and around the Horn of India to Japan and China as well. And Philip, you'll remember the Peabody Museum in Salem, and that's where a lot of the artifacts from those trips in the 19th century are on display. I grew up in Salem, and I'm lifting my arm up here because on the map, I lived right here, right in the armpit of my shirt. I grew up in Salem and went to Salem Classical School. I graduated in 1960, the last of the classical school. So every now and then, Kathy and I will joke about different things. She'll ask me a question and I'll give her an answer, and then she'll say, "Oh yeah, that's right, you were classically trained." So I had Latin and all of the chemistry and physics and all of those kind of courses growing up. But my dad, because he worked for this wealthy family, they had two homes. One was in Salem, and the other was in Marblehead. And so we would drive in the summertime or in the spring, and we would go out to Marblehead Neck, this little island off the coast of Massachusetts, off the coast of Marblehead. Marblehead Neck is out here, and we lived right here at Jack Point. The house we lived in has recently sold for about 2-point-something million. The house that Dad's employer lived in is probably worth about $10 or $12 million. It's right on the ocean. And Dad was always mindful to make sure I knew that I wasn't one of the wealthy ones, but grew up in not poverty, but when I first took my job at IBM in 1961, in that year I was making more money than my father was making after serving for 30, 40 years or so as a chauffeur. He had a home, a lovely home, an apartment in Salem, and in this lovely home on Marblehead Neck where we lived. So I had the benefit of growing up amongst, I guess you would say, the Boston elite, but knowing my place, knowing who I was, knowing what my roots were, and yet being able to work well within different levels of society, and that did me well. It also was able to show me where I needed to be humble. It pointed out to me a number of times how I was struck by the sin of pride, and that will come out as I describe some circumstances of my life as well. One of the traditions of my youth, and this goes back to my parents, because as immigrants, and many of you who might be first generation or maybe last generation Netherlanders, you know what it is to stay among the people whose language you recognize and whose culture you recognize. Every Thursday night throughout our 10, 15, 20 years that I remember of my life, every Thursday night we would drive either to Brookline, Massachusetts, two places in Brookline, to my father's two sisters, their homes, or on the next Thursday night they would drive to Salem or to Marblehead to be with us at our home. So every Thursday night we were with family, extended family, and it presented for me something that I have missed with a lot of travel, that a lot of locations that Kathy and I have lived in. We've kind of lost that. If the church was open, our family was there, and we would probably be among the last to leave. So that was my early heritage, and my father's favorite verse was Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. And I remember learning it from the King James Version. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not to your own understanding. In all your ways, all thy ways, acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths. So, how have my paths been directed in my upbringing, and then also some significant early life experiences? I remember when I was 4 years old, looking into my parents' bedroom, and my mother was kneeling beside her bed. This has happened to me before. I was remembering with Kathy and our daughter and my niece about another circumstance, and suddenly it just flashed before my brain. I saw it. I was there, and I gasped because I was participating in that moment. And just now, as I'm telling you about my 4-year-old experience, I remember my mother kneeling beside the bed, weeping, weeping. And she was holding a piece of paper. And she was just like this and just weeping. I'm 4 years old. The rock of my life cannot be weeping. What's the matter, Mommy? Mommy, Mommy. And she told me that her daddy had passed away. She had gotten a letter from Northern Ireland telling her that now, maybe a month ago, her father had died. He died in 1947. I never knew my grandparents because they lived, first of all, a long boat ride away and then a plane ride away, and I never got to meet any of my grandparents. But that was a vital moment in my life to realize that the rock of my life had a reliance upon a greater rock, the Lord Jesus Christ. And she was weeping and giving her lament to God. Well, a couple of years later, Christmas 1949, between Christmas Day and New Year's Day, I was 6, I would be 7 within about 6 weeks or so. And I was helping Mom take decorations off of the tree, and we were putting them away, and we were singing Christmas carols. And at one point during that time, I said, Mommy, I'm a bad boy, aren't I? And she said, what do you mean you're a bad boy? You're not a bad boy. I said, yeah, I am, because I've been listening to Sunday school classes and sermons and so on, and I knew that I was a sinner. And I said, I'm a sinner, aren't I? She said, well, yes, you are. And I said, I want to do something about that. And she said, what is that? I said, I want to give my heart to Jesus. And she did a wonderful thing. She said, will you go do that and come back and tell me? She didn't give me the here's how you do it, here's the prayer to pray, and if you do this and do it the right way. She said, you go ahead and do that and come back and tell me. So I did. And so when I'm asked the question, when were you saved? Have you ever heard that question asked of you? When were you saved? I used to say, I was saved some day between Christmas and New Year's of 1949. I was 6 years old. 6 weeks later, I'd be 7. That's when I was saved. And then over time, I changed that answer. When were you saved? And now I answer one of 2 ways. I was saved one Friday afternoon about 2,000 years ago when Jesus hung on a cross and died for my sins. And then if I wax a little more eloquent and get theological, I'll say, I was saved before the creation of the world in the providence of my God. Wow. So at any rate, that was a significant early life experience for me. Another very significant event occurred probably about 6 to 8 months later. Because then we were over, I was saved when I was here, the armpit, okay? But then 8 months later, we were out here on Martha's Vineyard. No, that's down there. Marblehead Neck. And my brother, my mother, and I, and this was the event that I mentioned a moment ago that really captured me probably 2 years ago when I was reminiscing and talking with our niece. And Mom, Norman, and I were playing hide and seek from my dad, because Dad was down at the big house And he was putting the cars away, and he was taking care of locking things up, and then he was going to come up to Miss Barker's brother's house up on the hill, and we were playing hide and seek. Make a long story short, Mom reached behind a small little pagoda, a little tea house, fell from there and broke her ankle. As she fell, she was holding this here, and as she turned, the side of that fell away, and then she just fell right down. Right leg slapped against outcropping of stone, cracked the ankle. Her foot was literally hanging on by probably just the Achilles tendon. She fell into pine boughs, so that broke her fall, but nevertheless her ankle was broken. Ambulance came and took her off to the hospital, and little 7-year-old Kenny lost his mother for probably 5 or 6 years, because even though it was only a broken ankle, it was a significant break, and the question was, will they amputate the ankle and the foot, or will they perform surgery? And Mom had several surgeries over the next several years, and pine needles would show up in her upper thigh, and she'd get tweezers and, oh, look at this, a 4-inch pine needle has made its way through my blood system and still working its way through there. So during those 5 or 6 years of in hospital, back home, recovering in the bed that we had put in the dining room where she could be there, and then aunts coming Thursday nights. Well, we weren't doing that for a while, but they would come and stay with Mom and care for her. I was alone because my brother, 6 years older, he's 14, 15, 16, and he doesn't want me around him. I got identified as the tag-along. And so tag-along, no, I had to be on my own, pretty much so. So during those very formative years for me, I learned how to amuse myself without the aid of Mom, without my older brother. And what did I do? I read. I read books copiously. I just read and read and read. And sometimes that can come back to bite me because I have an answer for lots of things that may not even have been asked. But you just hang around me for a little while and you'll find me talking. And so at any rate, that was a significant time of my life. Figuring out who am I as a new believer in Jesus Christ. I have my hearing aids in and they are connected to my phone, so I just heard a phone call from Washington, D.C. It might have been Sophia. I don't know. At any rate, it was by my 16th birthday. I had a 1950 Plymouth Belvedere, green sedan. I loved it. I actually raced it. What are you doing with it? Racing with a little 6-cylinder L head. Anyway, I went off to University of Massachusetts after I graduated from Salem Classical, and Sputnik had occurred in October of '57. So as a classical graduate, and I could see lightning, and I could hear thunder, so therefore I went to UMass and matriculated in the engineering program. And then flunked out. It was quite a shock to my system, but I flunked out of college. My daughter, when she first heard that, was quite amazed because she thought the world of her dad, and we appreciate the fact that we've got such a wonderful relationship with her. But I flunked out. The till was empty, and I had to get a job. So how did I get to work for IBM for so long? A friend's father recommended I speak to, and he named the person. He said, this is a friend of mine from Eastern Yacht Club over here someplace, from Eastern Yacht Club, and he's the branch manager of IBM in Salem, and you need to go see him and see if you can get a job at IBM. So I walked into the IBM branch office with a blue shirt and a tie and a muted Madras sport jacket. You probably didn't realize that muted and Madras could go together. Yeah. It was green and blue and gray, and they were relatively darker colors. So I went in there, a pair of gray pants. This is the white suit. Barry wears a top hat and white shirt and tie. Well, anyway, I got a job there as a customer engineer. I'm the guy that flunked out of engineering at UMass, but I got a job as a customer engineer, which is the fancy title for service rep. And I was fixing typewriters and time clocks. And it was later in that year that IBM announced the Selectric typewriter. Some of you will remember that with the little golf ball on the top. That just absolutely blew my mind, that a typewriter. I was fixing the keystrokes, all of that stuff, dropping the items out of the basket, cleaning them, and here comes this typewriter. I said, this is amazing. Well, the beauty of working for IBM at that time was that they provided tuition reimbursement at 50%. So I started going to night school at Suffolk University, which has become a fairly well-renowned regional school. There's a law school associated with it. That's another story, and I'll tell about that if you insist. But anyway, I got my Bachelor of Science degree, Bachelor of Science in Philosophy and English Literature. You might ask, how did you get a BS degree at? We understand the BS part. Those of you who have coffee with me in the mornings, you understand that. But how did you get a BS in Philosophy and English Lit? Well, it's because I took a semester of French, and I said, this is ridiculous. So I changed and I took some science courses and math courses. I took biology. And anyhow, 1964 to 1968, I was in the Massachusetts National Guard, and I was the computer in the artillery group. And remember the movie about the ladies who were the computers for NASA? Well, this was the day when the computer actually a slipstick, and I would have to examine things and figure out how many bags of powder to have them put into the cannon. And the other guys were figuring out how to aim the gun, and I was figuring out how to raise and lower the gun. So I did that for 4 years. Decided to go to seminary, and that's another story that is quite interesting. I'm looking at the clock. Why am I taking so much time here? Going to seminary is an important question because it comes back to pride. I was competing for a management job at IBM. There were 3 of us competing for 2 jobs. The other 2 guys got the job. And then in 1968, there was an economic downturn, and because we were then living in a manufacturing economy, I knew that an economy of that sort, it would take about 3 years for it to turn over. And I got bypassed to become a manager. So I'm going to be just fixing typewriters for the next 3 years, and then there'll be a turnaround, economy will bump up, and then they'll say, oh, we need new managers. Well, what about Ken? Well, we didn't accept him last time around, so let's look for somebody else. So I decided I'm going to beat them at their game. I'm going to take a leave of absence, and I'm going to get a master's degree, because I just completed my Bachelor of Science in Philosophy and Literature, which had nothing to do with IBM, so that wasn't going to work. So I'm going to go get a master's degree. What'll I get? I could get an MBA, then they have to promote me, right? What if they don't promote me with an MBA? Well, then I'll be embarrassed, and I'll have to just stand up and say, well, I quit. I don't want to quit. IBM's a great company. I know what I'll do. I'll get a Master of Divinity degree, because I love divinity, I love Bible teaching, I love theology, I love all of that stuff related to philosophy and so on. And if I get the MDiv degree and they promote me, bingo, I beat the system. But if they don't promote me, I'll at least have a degree I can use on the weekends, Wednesday nights, all that good stuff. So I go off to seminary with my plan in mind, and I'm going to beat the system. Well, I had a come to Jesus meeting in 1970 while I was in my middle training. No, I guess it was my last year. And I heard a sermon in chapel from Matthew 16 where Jesus says, among other things, I will build my church. We've all heard that phrase, right? I heard that phrase, but I also heard in the back of my mind Jesus saying, I will build my church. And Ken, you're not interested in any of that, are you? Ken, you are not interested in my church. You're just here for yourself. Whoa. That was one of those gotcha moments as well. And at that point, I had an overwhelming sense of God's love and of his call to ministry. And I committed myself to the church and to ministry. But within days, God made it clear to me, I want you to go back to IBM. You're going to graduate. You're going to go back to IBM. And so I went back to IBM, and for the next 20 years, literally, I couldn't keep a job. I got a promotion within IBM every 18 to 24 months. And the fascinating thing was that with each of them, there had been a prior offer. Within a month or so of my promotion prior, I had been offered a consideration to come and be dean of students at a seminary, come to be by the way, I got an MBA in finance along the way too, to come and be a chief financial officer for an academic setting, come and be associate pastor here, come and take this ministry. And in each of those occasions, Kathy and I would literally agonize. We would sit, we would pray, we would think about what are we to do in this circumstance. And each time we said, all right, Lord, if now's the time, we'll leave IBM. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not to your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will direct your paths. That was my dad's favorite verse, but it became ours too. And in each case, as we finally said, yes, Lord, if this is time, that job was snapped away. It disappeared. It was filled elsewhere. The organization decided they weren't going to fill that spot. And it was almost as if every time God was saying, I'm just checking your allegiance. We stayed on with IBM for another 20 years. And Kwesi managed all of those things that we did. Well, during those 20 years, we served in a variety of churches and also denominations. I was an elder in the United Church of Christ, also in the UPC USA, the United Presbyterian Church. Circumstances in 1981 within the Presbyterian Church led me to conclude that that was no longer a place for us, and that was when we got involved in the Christian Reformed Church in Midland Park, New Jersey. And I was selected by the Classis Passaic to represent them at Synod of 1986. So came here and was delighted for our time in the CRC. Retired in 1994 after 33 years. I was 51 years old, and I'm still thinking through, in all your ways, acknowledge him. And that brings me into the ministry. After being called to be an associate pastor in an EV free church where we were, when we were living in Connecticut, I was then called with Kathy to go out and pastor a church on Martha's Vineyard. And that's where we really cut our teeth in pastoral ministry. 10 years, I had told the people they had They had had 11 ministers in about 22 years. No, maybe it was less than that, about 18 years. So they had ministers coming and going, coming and going, coming and going, and never able to settle into the church. The church was badly wounded. I knew that there had been 2 prior pastors who had been sexually complicit, in one case with a homosexual relationship, on again, off again in Boston, and then the other left the church with one of the women in the church. And so I was coming to a church that was broken, bruised, wounded. I remember after we moved there, I went to a garden shop and I was buying some stuff, and the woman said, "You're new here. Where are you? Where'd you come from?" and so on. "What do you do?" And I told her, "Oh, I'm pastor at Faith Community Church." "Oh, that church. My husband and I were having counseling, and that minister was playing around with some other woman." I said, "Yeah, I know. I heard about John." She said, "John? I don't know any John." "No, this was Drew." "What? There was a third guy." This church was wounded. My goodness. Well, we had told them that we're going to stay here for 10 years, and we're going to live on the island. So when we see each other in the supermarket later, we need to be friends. We are going to get through whatever problems come our way as followers of Jesus Christ. And that was kind of that transactional focus that I had. In all your ways, acknowledge Him. He'll direct your path. And so I was trusting that He would direct our paths in that setting. And we did. We were there for the 10 years. I resigned in the end of June of 2006. And the plan was that I was already into my DMin program. I was going to be working, mentoring young church planters from Lawrence, Massachusetts, all the way down to New York City. And I was going to be mentoring church planters along that route. Well, God had other plans for us, because in September of 2006, ended June, so July, August, September. In late August, we were in Germany for 3 weeks with friends from IBM who had a place over there, and we were bicycling around Lake Constance in Germany. In September, we were bicycling up at Acadia National Park, and it was there that Kathy's injury occurred, and broke her biking down, coasting down by Eagle Lake in Acadia National Park, went off the trail, struck a tree, threw her back on a sheet of granite, broke her spinal column at T5-6, and severed the connection of the 5 ribs on both sides of the spinal column. So the back of her ribs were broken. But she had struck a tree, and the tree had broken her sternum, so she had a complete floating chest. And never lost consciousness. I heard her yell, "Oh no," and I looked over, and on my bike I was coasting ahead of her. That's what I did. So I was ahead of her. I looked over my shoulder and I saw her here, and I knew that I should have had to look like that, because she would be behind me on the road. But she was there because she had already gone off the road. So I dropped my bike, dropped my backpack, and ran back to her. She hadn't lost consciousness, and she said, "Honey, God has us on a different path." Clearly what our plans were, me resigning at the end of June, and our plans on what we were going to do, all eliminated. So after Kathy's 3-month rehab in Atlanta, we went to Texas, where our son and his family were living. And long story short, that was where my credentials were approved by the PCA, and I participated in a church plant with another PCA pastor, and then from there was retired in 2019. Let's see, faith at work, faith in retirement. Let me tell you in the remaining 5 minutes about zooming around the globe. Kwesi mentioned that in terms of those circumstances of his introduction. In 2014, Kathy and I received an invitation to go to New Delhi to participate in the first ever disability ministry conference in India, and it was held by Indian nationals, primarily focused by Emmanuel Church up in New Delhi. Emmanuel is pretty broadly known across India. There were about 550 people in attendance. 500 were national Indians, and 50 of us were from away. So it wasn't a 50 people coming and telling us how to do this. Rather, it's 50 people invited to come along and see what is going on in India and participate in some workshops, as was our focus. My D-Min ended up focusing on the theology of suffering, theology of disability, and so on. Kathy's a nurse and an MSW social worker. And India was never on our bucket list, but there we were in India. Came home, shared with our Sunday school class, like you hear, what we did in India. And one of the young fellows came up to us afterwards and said, "You need to meet my dad. My dad's been to India so many times, and he'll want to talk to you." I met him at the Christmas season, and then he said, "You need to talk to Saji Lukos. I'll get you in touch with him." I got a phone call probably a couple of weeks later. "Hello, Pastor Ken. This is Saji Lukos. We don't know each other yet, but we are going to get to know each other, and we're going to love each other." And Saji came to our home, and he is the president and founder of Reaching Indians Ministry International, RIMI. In India, that ministry is called Mission India. You know how it can be confusing when I say, "Oh yeah, we're part of Mission India." "Oh, John DeVries." "Oh, no, actually, no. John DeVries wanted to call it Mission India over there, but the name was already taken. And Saji wanted to call it Mission India over here, but that name was already taken. So Reaching Indians Ministry International, Mission India. Mission India here, different. But both doing the work that God has called them to. When I met Saji, he said, "Definitely, we need to have you come over." And so I've taught at the seminary, a Mission India Theological Seminary, which is approved and accredited by the same organization that Garrett is aware of, Asia Ministries, Asia Theological Seminaries. And so I've taught there church history, hermeneutics, study of Bible interpretation, as well as theology. And Kathy has taught English as a second language. We've been back 3 times, most recently last March, and been to a number of different states. And God is continuing to use us in ministry, as was introduced my Zooming to a variety of different places, teaching and just loving doing that. God has used us in retirement, and he can use you based upon the gifts that he's given you. And knowing how to do that, what are the circumstances where God is pushing you to do something. I mentioned the word transactional. I am a transactional guy. I'm not a visionary. I don't plan. Well, I do plan, but I'm not looking out to where am I going to be in such and such a time frame. Mine is, what do I have to do today? What's the next job? What's the next thing? I'm program oriented. If you give me a project, I'll dig into that project and I'll work on that. So I'm a transactional guy. I look for the next thing. And lo and behold, when I look back, I see through all of my transactional stuff, God leading me, and God leading Kathy, and God leading our own children, all through that way. My dad's verse, I'm only realizing it today, because I'm a transactional guy. Romans 8, 38, 37, 38. That's kind of my verse, but no, I'm discovering it's really trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge him, and he will direct your paths. Or the newer translation, he will make your paths straight. Thanks be to God.
We have time for a few questions. Does anyone have any questions they'd like to ask him? If he'll repeat the questions so everybody can hear. Any questions?
How did you meet Kathy?
How did I meet Cassie? How did I get saved? It was between Christmas and New Year's, right? How did I meet Kathy? That was a saving moment too. I met her between Christmas and New Year's in 1967, and she will tell you I had dated all the women at my church, and so I was now going to see if there was more over at her church. All of the young people, the young adults, had been away that week, Christmas week, on a retreat. Kathy was there. Kathy was a nursing student at New England Baptist School of Nursing. She was the only young person at the church, and a mutual friend introduced us. And I was pleased. She'll say, it wasn't my face, it wasn't my... I was attracted to her, let me just be blunt about that. But when I greeted her and she greeted me, we shook hands. And she gave me a real solid hand clasp. I said, wow, that's a good hand clasp. She's really pleased to meet me. That's how she shakes people's hands, but she's really pleased to meet me. So that's how I met her. And within 6 weeks, I had determined that this was going to be my wife. She had invited me to her capping ceremony. That would have been the middle of March. So 2 months later, I watched her come down with another nurse student, each holding a rose, and they're walking down the center aisle of a Baptist church, because it's New England Baptist School of Nursing. And as she's walking down that aisle, I just had this lump in my throat. I said, she's going to walk down a church aisle for me one day.
Wow.
And I didn't tell her about it for fear I'd scare her away. I told her about it maybe a year later, and she was not scared. So.
Other questions?
We've been married 56 years.
All right.
Huh? Yeah, 50 of them have been wonderful. 6 of them have been exquisite.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, we thank you again for coming to support Ken and to participate in this Faith at Work series. Again, we've got a couple more that are coming up. We've got Molly Guillaume on the 30th, and we've got Philip Baum on the 17th of July. We're working on 27th.
It's a spear.
20, I got too many details in my head. We're still working on some folks for August. The grant concludes in September, and I just want to give you another heads up. We're going to do a year in review celebration, one here at the Ridge and one at the Terrace. So this is going to be a big shebang. We're going to do the year in review, all the various things that we've had. We'll have a little summary booklet and the artwork, the banners and everything that have been created for this project will be on display, and there will be heavy hors d'oeuvres. Heavy hors d'oeuvres. Not just cookies. We're talking about you might be able to get away with not eating lunch that day. So just know that those dates are coming up. I think those are September. I'm not even going to try to guess. Let me 12th and the 19th. The 12th at the Terrace and the 19th here at the Ridge. So just know we're going to have balloons and everything to remind people this is a party, it's a big celebration. And we have something else in the works that I hope will take place. We're trying to get a jazz ensemble here to do Jazz Vespers.
All right.
Don't know if you've ever been to a Jazz Vespers service, but we're trying to get something again in September. I'm going to make that contact later today. God bless you. Thanks. Yes, sir.
Goliath Spear and Teen Challenge,
Goliath Spear, remind me of the dates.
July 17th.
July 17th, Goliath Spear is a wonderful exhibit. And it's going to take almost a truck to bring it in here, but it's going to be wonderful. And then Teen Challenge will be here on the.
That we haven't got a date set.
Don't have a date for that. So we've got two other events. So these things just keep rolling. So stay tuned, watch your buzz, look for the digital announcements and so forth. And thank you again for coming. God bless.